Hi everyone, I'm Ankita Masan. I'm a principal front-end engineer at Treebo. I'm currently working on Treebo's SaaS product called Hotel Superhero. My work involves building and architecting different modules of front-end part for Hotel Superhero product. I also like to write blogs on React, GraphQL, JavaScript, and web-related concepts in general. I try to explain difficult concepts in simple and easy to understand language. Today, I'm going to talk about event delegation in React 17. Let me first tell you why I chose to talk on this topic. I was debugging an issue related to a stop propagation event, and I hopped onto an issue that was reported on React's GitHub repository. When I read further, I understood that event delegation is not working the way it should be, and there's going to be a fundamental change in the implementation of event delegation in the current version of React, and what it is going to be in the succeeding versions of React. This looked interesting to me because and I thought that this could be a potential topic for the talk because of two reasons. First one, event delegation is a fundamental concept in JavaScript, and yet if you ask this to many front-end developers, it takes some time to digest the word delegation, and there is a good chance that you won't get the correct answer in the first go. Another, we use React in most of our projects, and I think it makes sense to understand about these how these fundamental concepts like event delegation work in the library that you so often use. I'm going to talk on event delegation for the next 15 to 20 minutes. And I think it makes sense to first understand what event delegation is all about. Then we'll understand how event delegation works in React 16 and earlier versions, what was the problem with that implementation, and how it got solved in React 17. Let's get started. Event delegation, it is basically a pattern for handling events. So what you see on the screen are different types of events. For example, on click, on drag, on mouse enter, these are some of the mouse events. On submit, on input, these are some of the form events. There's a UI event called on scroll. On load and on errors are some of the image events. You can have hundreds of click handlers in your application. You can have thousands of submit handlers in your application. The way in which you handle these pool of events efficiently that doesn't impact the performance of your application is called as event delegation. Let's consider an example to understand more about it. So here you have a container, and this container has 10 cards. The requirement is it should whenever you click on any card, it should display the number that is printed on the card. For example, if I click on card number 4, there should be an alert saying card number 4. If I click on card number 6, there should be an alert saying card number 6. One way to go about this problem is to attach on-click event handlers to all of these 10 cards. And when a particular card is clicked, its respective on-click event handler would be executed, and it will print the number for this card. So if you click on card number 4, it will execute the event handler for card number 4, and 4 would be printed. Another way to go about it is just to have single event handler for this common ancestor container instead of having event handlers for each of these cells. Let's understand this with the help of an example. I have a very simple function. I have a very simple component here called event delegation. Obviously, the UI doesn't look as nice as it was in the diagram, but bear with me. We are going to understand the fundamental concept. I have just one on-click handler which is attached to the table element. If you notice, there is no on-click handler on each of these table cells. There are 3 rows, and in each of these rows, there are 2 cells. If I click on any of these cells, it should print the number that is there on that cell. For example, if I click on cell number 2, I should get 2. If I click on cell number 4, I should get 4. Let's try and see what happens. If I click on cell number 3, it is printing TD3. If I click on cell number 2, it is printing TD2. Okay, it is working as expected, despite the event handler being on the table element. Why is it important? Why is it important to do event delegation in the first place? Why is it important, to have just one event handler at the root of the element? When you saw, we just had one event listener at the root table element. This helps in improving the performance of the application. We are going to see on the next slide how it actually helps in improving the performance of the application and what's wrong in attaching event handlers to all of the cells in the table. So can we attach on-click handlers for all the cells in the table? Let's again go back to a test which is on jsperf.com. Here, this is a test which has one div element with ID as container, there is one element with class as one, and there are many elements with class as many. This is an HTML structure that we are going to test on. Now, um, I'm going to run three tests. The first test, attach click handler to just one element which is with a class one. The second test attaches click handlers to all the many classes. The third one attaches click handler to just the parent container, and then that handler is bounded to all the many events. So in the third test, there are not going to be as many event handlers as the many classes. There's going to be just one event handler which is on the container, and that event will delegate to the target nodes whichever is clicked. If you see the performance after running these three tests, you will notice that this is the fastest among all, and this is the slowest. So this if you attach an event handler just on the parent and let that handler delegate event to all the children, it is more performant than the other approaches, because obviously there's going to be just one event listener and not too many. So what did we learn? We learned that if we bind an event to many elements, it is much slower, even if the event is of one single type. So in the example that we saw, the event was just of one single type, click. And the most performant way to bind an event to the parent and delegate it to the target nodes. Cool. Let's move ahead. So now we saw that we should have an event listener at the parent node. But what there's an event listener only at the parent node. How do these events propagate from parent to the target? Let's find out. There are four important event phases in JavaScript. Event.none, it simply means that no event is being executed. There's a capturing phase, which means that handlers are executed while descending down the tree. So what happens is when you click anywhere on the document, event first flows from document to the target. It reaches the target node, and then it flows from target back to the document again. Where these event handlers are executed decides the phase of the event. For example, when event is traveling from document to target and your event handlers are executed in this direction from document to target, it means that event is getting executed in the capturing phase. It reaches target. Now if the event handlers are executed while going upwards, while bubbling upwards, then it is that your event handlers are being executed in the bubbling phase. So your event is going to travel from document to reach target, and then from target to document. Where your event handlers are being executed, that decides the phase of the event. Let's visualize this with the help of a diagram so that it is more clear. If you click anywhere here, the event will first, and there is an event listener at the document. So what will happen is event will flow from document to reach the target node. It will reach the target node, and then it will execute the event handler. For example, on click, which is there on the TD cell. Then it will move upwards to the document. If you are executing this event in bubbling phase, what it will do is it will direct first propagate to target, execute the event handler of TD cell. Then while moving upwards, it will execute the event handlers that are associated with each of these elements. So while moving upwards, it will execute the event handler for TD, then TR, then T-body, and then table. And if your event is being executed in the capturing phase, it will execute the event handlers for each of these elements while going down the tree. Let's see this with an example so that it is again more clear. I'm taking the similar example. There's one component, event delegation bubbling. And or the difference from the earlier example is just that I've added on click to table, T-body, TR, and TD. In the earlier example, there was on click only at table. So now we have to figure out the sequence of these events that are going to be executed in the bubbling phase. I'll just do one change. I'll execute event delegation bubbling now. Now let's see the sequence of events. So if I click on one, okay, it is working as expected. It first print the console statement that is on the table cell, then it moved upwards, print the console statement for row, and then it prints the console statement for body, and then it reached the table. So what happened was event traveled from document to target, but the event handlers were executed when the event was traveling back from target to the document node. That's how event bubbling works. Let's quickly take an example of capture as well. So here in capture, the only difference is you have to use on-click capture event in React. Let me change in the app so that we can see what happens in capture. If I click on cell number 1, again, this is working as expected. So it first clicked the event handler of table, then it moved down, clicked there's an event handler of T body is being executed, event handler of T row is executed, and then the event handler of T cell is executed. These were the two fundamental phases in event delegation: bubbling and capture. So now we learned about event delegation and two important phases in which the events get executed. Let's look at an interesting example now. That is related to event listeners. So here, if you see the screenshot, there's a button element and there are two event listeners. There are two event listeners that are being added to the button element. Both are of type click. The first one, after the promise is resolved, prints P1 and it prints 1. The second one, once the promise is resolved, prints P2 and it prints console log 2. Now we have to guess the sequence of these statements. I'll move further and we'll see what executes first. The correct answer is 1. So this would be printed first, then P1 and 2 and P2. If you guessed 1, 2, P1 and P2, let's find out why your answer is incorrect. First, we'll understand that both the click event listeners, they would be registered against the button element. This is confirmed. Now, these event listeners, they execute. So between these event listeners, there is a phase when the call stack is empty. First event listener, first this console log would be printed, call stack would be empty. Let's visualize this to make it more clear. Um, so there's a console log 1. Once this is done, you have an async queue which is empty. After this is printed, the event loop will pick up console log P1 from async queue, and the promise will be resolved, and that's why this will be printed. And then the another event listener would be recorded in the call stack. So why these are not synchronous, why we don't have console log 1 and console log 2? Because there is an empty, because these both of these events, they don't occur simultaneously. There would be an empty space in call stack, and once event loop recognizes that the call stack is empty, it picks up a task from async queue and executes that. So that's why P1 would be printed, and then another event will come on the call stack which will print console log 2. After printing console log 2, it will resolve the promise of the second event. So this is what we saw, right? The call stack is empty between both of them. This is the main important point. And that since the call stack is empty, promise P1 will be resolved first. Also, you should understand that promises resolve asynchronously, and they will only be resolved when your call stack is empty. And that opportunity is when your first event handler is executed. That's when the call stack is empty, and the event loop will pick up this particular promise to resolve it. If you're still not convinced, let's execute this example and find out ourselves. I have copied the same code here. This is a JavaScript code that I showed on the screenshot. Here, there are two event listeners, same. So what I'll do is, let me click on this button. It prints 1, P1, 2, and P2. So it prints 1, P1, 2, and P2. Okay, so we learned a lot about event delegation, two important phases: bubbling, capturing. We also saw an interesting example related to event listener. Now let's move on to how event delegation works in React. In React, there is a wrapper around default browser events, which is called as synthetic events. So every event that you see in React is an instance of class synthetic event. Synthetic event contains these all properties. So there are properties called as prevent default, stop propagation, cancelable, and these all properties are associated with this class synthetic event. Why does React have a common wrapper for these events? It is simply to maintain consistency between different browsers, because each of the browsers, Chrome, Firefox, Safari, they have different behavior related to events, and React doesn't. So we as developers don't have to handle these nitty gritties of events based on different browsers. React does it on its own. If you if you write React code, you might have seen that you don't ever write document.add event listener. We used to do this while writing JavaScript and jQuery projects, but we don't do it in React. It is because React automatically attaches event listeners at the document node. And also, one thing to notice, React follows event bubbling, which means the event handlers would be executed when the event is traveling from target to the parent node. So how this works in React 16 and the earlier versions, there's going to be one single instance of on click, on change, on blur, and many other events which are attached to the document node. There won't be any listener to any of these child elements. There's going to be just one listener on the document node. And now if you click on TD, event will flow from document to TD. It will execute the listener which is on TD. It will execute the on-click function which is written on 3D, and while moving upwards, it will execute the on-clicks for T-body, table, app, etc. By default, React follows bubbling phase. So events would be executed while moving from target to document. Now, this is all fine and good. So what were the issues with event delegation in React 16? Why it didn't work out? So there were many issues which were reported in larger React projects. One of the issues that was reported by the Atom editor was using two versions of React in nested React trees. So let's understand this with an example. Um, on the screen, you see there are two boxes. There is one red outer box, there is one blue inner box. Red outer box is being rendered by a different version of React. Blue box is being rendered by a different version of React. So basically, there are nested React trees. And if I click anywhere on the blue box, there's a click handler which should print inner on click. If I click anywhere on the red box, it should print outer on click. So from what we learned so far, if I click anywhere on the blue box, the sequence of a console should be inner on click and outer on click. Um, because it follows bubbling, so it should print on click for inner element, and then it should move upwards and print on click for the outer element. Let's figure out if it is actually working properly. It just printed inner on click. If I click anywhere outside, it printed outer on click. It is not printing outer on click. So what actually happened is, there is somewhere stop propagation event written here in the outer tree, and that is stopping the event from reaching the window level, that is stopping the event from reaching the document level. So ideally this tree would have expected that if a user clicks anywhere, my event would reach the window level, but that is not happening. Let's understand with a very simple example which is in React 16. So what I have here is, let me quickly explain the HTML structure. I have a div ID, which is parent. I have a div ID child. Now, what I'm doing is, app.js has a simple button. So when I click on a button, it will print button clicked. Okay. Now what I do is, on parent, I'm doing stop propagation on parent. And I'm rendering the React tree on inside child. So I'm rendering the React tree inside this div. And I have event.stop propagation inside parent. Okay. If I click on, now if I click on this button, this is not printing button clicked. As a user, I would expect that my event would be printed. I'm not concerned about the outside world. I just want this. If I click on this button should be executed. And that is not happening because some other developer who is working on the other parts of React, they have done stop propagation to the outer element. And that's why somehow your events are not working. We can quickly check this out in React 17. It's the same example, just that the versions of React and React DOM are changed. Now let me click on, and there's also a stop propagation event on parent. If I click on, it is properly printing button clicked. Let's understand this with the use case. So there's a use case where you have to track the usage of your site. So whenever user clicks anywhere on your website, you want to track the position. Okay. Now in larger project, it is possible that React is just a smaller part of your application, and the other parts of your application are written in other different programming languages. So when you click anywhere on React, you would expect that this event would bubble up and reach the window level to track analytics at the window level. But somewhere, if there is a stop propagation event, the event will interfere with the DOM stop propagation event, and it will not allow this event to be recorded at the window level. So this simply means that what got changed in event delegation React 17? Instead of attaching event handlers to the document that interferes with two different React trees, or it interferes with smaller part of the React project, now React attaches event handlers to the root of the React tree. Initially, it used to attach it to the document node. Now these event handlers are attached to the root element. Okay. So even if you have stop propagation event, it is not going to interfere with the window element. You still want to record this event at the window level. It's just that you don't want to propagate it through the tree. But these events would be recorded at the window level. There were many issues that were related to event propagation that being reported because React was attaching event listeners at the document node. Global event listeners on document body were not getting executed because somewhere down the tree somebody had written e.stop propagation, and that was also interfering with other events and stopping it to reach the document level. There was an issue related to React root cuts out React events because of stop propagation. These all issues got solved when React changed the implementation from attaching event listeners to the React root node instead of attaching it to the document level. Let's quickly recap all that we have learned. So event delegation, it basically means that you have event listener at the parent node instead of attaching event listeners to all the child nodes. If you want to understand this with a real world example, consider the example of Twitter. If Twitter has to attach event listeners to all of the tweets, right? There would be many event listeners, and inside one tweet there are also many call actions. So there are going to be many event listeners for just one single tweet, and that's why Twitter implements just one single listener for the parent node, and that parent node listener handles the click functions for all the succeeding nodes. We understood about two fundamental event phases: capturing phase, which is event handlers are being executed from parent to target; bubbling phase, which means event handlers are being executed from target to parent. So first of all, event flows from document to reach target. It executes the event handlers of target, and then it moves from target to parent. Where your event handlers are being executed, that decides the phase in which your event is executed. We saw that React automatically handles event delegation for you. You don't have to attach event listeners. Initially in React 16 and earlier versions, it used to attach event listener at the document node. But there were problems with having nested trees. There were problems when React was just a smaller portion. It was blocking the propagation of event. And now React attaches event handlers at the root node in that React tree. Thank you for listening to this talk patiently. Here are my social media links to stay connected. Thank you and have a great day.